definition of culture. In the Encyclopedia of Social Sciences, means the way of life. It consists of conventional patterns of thought and behavior, including beliefs, rules of conduct, political organization, economic activity, and alike, and which is passed on from one generation to next by learning and not by biological inheritance. The concept of culture is an idea of signal importance because it provides a set of principles for explaining and understanding human behavior. It is one of the distinguishing elements of modern social thought and maybe one of the most important achievements of modern social science. The modern concept of culture, as we call it, has got several principles, but for the understanding of today's issue, there are three important elements we must understand which belong to culture. One is the pattern, which both guides and defines thought and behavior which are learned through this. For example, when we say, do not copy someone, be yourself, it means there is a set pattern in our mind which informs us that someone is copying someone else and he is not being himself. So that is a culture which we understand. And anyone who deviates from there, we say, behave and be yourself. That is the first and foremost. Secondly, a large component of culture is below the level of consciousness, and I'm sure you all know, below the level of consciousness means the language. Language is part of the culture. When we speak, we do not think. It comes directly, and that's a part of the culture. And thirdly, and importantly, it is the culture which patterns structure, which structures both thought and perception. And finally, which has not been discussed in the encyclopedia, is that the culture is connected to the soil, to the place, to the region in which it nourishes itself. Now the question is, what is the significance of culture in Islam? And then, what is Shia culture? Now, significance of culture in Islam cannot be discussed, of course, without making a reference to the Holy Quran. And when I went to the Quran to find out how Quran discusses the culture, I find that there is not a single verse in the Holy Quran that deals with the culture. And then I began to discover what has been said in the Hadith literature about the culture. It has not been discussed in Hadith literature as well. And then I considered Nahj al-Balagha. And in Nahj al-Balagha, there is not a single saying about the culture. It doesn't mean that I was looking for English culture in Arabic Quran. It is accepted that the equivalent of culture in Arabic language is saqafa. Saqafat, what we call it. But this is a very late use of saqafa, which means culture. Originally, in one or two sayings from Hazrat Aisha, there has been word Sahaba discussed, but that has been discussed in terms of education, ta'aleem of tarbiyat, not in terms of as a whole culture. But what do we find out? How does it inform us? How does it affect us when we see that Quran does not discuss the whole culture? Hadith does not discuss culture. What is discussed in the culture, since ulama are sitting, you must refer it and should not bypass this. Quran refers to Sunnah, Sunnat al-Awwaleen. Quran discusses urf in few places. Sunnah, I think 9 to 10 places. But Sunnah, I would define what Sunnah is and what urf is. But I can confidently say that Sunnah and urf are parts of the culture, but not culture in that sense. So how does Quran neglect the culture? Why Quran is neglecting the culture? Can Quran neglect the culture? So my answer is no. Quran does not neglect the culture. Quran considers the culture, but then exhorts people, suggests people, and tries to influence the culture through the thought. And Quran's teaching was that it is the thought which would influence the culture, and it should not be otherwise. A thought should not be affected through culture, but a thought should affect the culture and take into consideration the culture and then try to evolve the culture through thought. How? The best example for me to quote is that the Quran introduces the personality of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the culture. And having introduced Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he raises his status to the messenger who then tells who he is. And the key concept for me to understand the personality of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is in Surah Al-Imran, verse 21. قُلْ إِن تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِ. Tell these people that if you love Allah, you follow me. And that was not the culture of Saudi Arabia. And that created the problem. And that has been completely misunderstood. Even at that time, even today's time. People begin to bypass the Prophet ﷺ and try to approach Allah directly. And how did it happen? That they would criticize him. They would ask him explanations. Having become Muslims for 10, 15 years, they would question him, are you really a messenger of God? In this culture, where authority was not being accepted as Allah wanted us to accept, there was a man who was exception to this culture. And his name is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali ibn Abi Talib was the only one in that culture